I got to I
No
got to do what I
sensitivity
wanted.
reader. Yep, no sensitivity readers. Nobody triggered.
Yeah, no, I'm really grateful that I was able to have control over my book, my self-publishing book. So, um, we were talking offline that there were some heartaches of getting it done self-published. It's not easy, but at the same time, I also had control over it, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like there's pros and cons either way, trying to get your work published by a publishing company or doing it yourself. It's not like it's effortless to do it yourself. It sounds like it's actually quite a
Oh
ton of
no.
effort.
But I've learned a lot. So I think if I do this again, it won't be as hard the next time, right? It's always hardest the first time. So if there is a next time, which there probably will be, it won't be as hard. I already understand certain things, some of the pitfalls that I fell into. I won't fall into them again. About formatting the cover and just all these little nitpick things that are really hard when you don't understand them.
Yeah. Well, how long did it take for you to write your book?
Well, it was like in progress for a long time because honestly, it was a really shortened version on my website like 2 years ago. Then I expanded it and I was like, okay, this will be it. And then I expanded it more and this will be it. So I guess probably about a year and a half, but just because I just kept adding things to it and it finally came together now. I submitted the manuscript to my first editor. Actually, it was right before we left for that Gen Spec conference in November. Was that the end of October. So that
Mm.
was when I finished the actual writing, but then there was a bunch of editing and things I still wanted to add. Oh, wait, I want to change this. Oh, wait, I want to add that. Oh, wait, this happened, or this person said this. I want to add this quote. So there's that. And, you have to, at a certain point, just cut it off and say, this is it. This is what you got. So it's not
Yeah,
easy.
I had a teacher in college for an advanced composition course who said you're finished writing when you put the pen down.
Yeah.
That's when you know you're finished. Just when you have to just stop. You have to call it at some point.
And it's good that the WPath files came out after I already published it because I would have wanted to put that in it too, but I had to just let it go. Like
It's
all of a
such an
sudden,
evolving field.
right? Everything new things happen all the time. But honestly, my book reflects what the WPath file says, just in a broader sense. I obviously didn't have the inside quotes, but
Mhm,
there's a chapter in there that just shows how it's corrupt and how it's
mhm.
run by activists and how it's not a consensus, even though they claim that they
They
have a
act as if.
consensus.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, it is Monday, March 18th, day after St. Patrick's Day, and we are here with Pamela Garfield-Jaeger, who has just published a book, and it's called A Practical Response to Gender Distress. And I've been able to skim the book and read some of it, and I'm really happy for you that you put this out, and I'm really happy for the people who are going to benefit from reading this. I think it's fantastic, and this is such an emerging space to be in, this phenomenon, and I want to get into it some more and ask you some questions about it, and but I'm glad you're here. And we don't have Jen with us today, so she had something come up today, so we have Deborah, myself, and Pamela. And Deborah, do you want to, before we get going, introduce Solid Ground
Yep.
in your best David
I'm
impression?
still reading it now. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm not going to try the accent. I would have had to warm up ahead of time. Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice and or COVID mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join one of our groups for only $5 a month. To find out how to join our community, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. Please note Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such.
Thanks, Deborah. So I want to save some time at the end of this conversation before we conclude to go over some viewer comments, because we've had a lot of really, really great feedback. Not great in the sense of it's good about us, but great in the sense that there's a lot of material and a lot of personal stories that people have shared. And I have a couple. I don't know if you found any that you want to go over, Deborah, specifically, but I saved a few viewer responses to read and hope I can get y'all's response with me. We can kind of go into those a little bit, but we'll do that at the end. And first, Pamela, I when I was reading your book, I've just started it, but I really like how you start out with this Rip Van Winkle story. I like that metaphor, and I can relate to it as well in a way. I'd like to, maybe if you want to share a little bit about that, but it was very relatable to me, having not for the reasons that you did, but for very different life reasons, having been absent from academia for a while and coming back into it. Mine was academic, yours was professional, but it was like, what are we talking about? We've like, suddenly the rules of and the way that we understand humans has just fundamentally changed. And so could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I have. I start the book out. It says my Rip Van Winkle story. I've actually in the past called myself Rip Van Therapist. Um, because my personal story is I have a lot of experience working in the field since the 90s. And in late 2016, early 2017, I had to drop out of work and really out of life because I had a debilitating disability, really more of like an injury where I was having a lot of nerve pain. It was tripped by a poor ergonomic setup at the desk I.
Uh-oh,
Oops.
Pamela, you froze a little bit. Maybe she'll come right back. Oh, there you go. Just froze up a minute. So
Oh,
you had an injury that was triggered by an ergonomic setup. So it wasn't
yeah.
like a accident or anything. It was just
No,
wow.
it was a repetitive stress injury.
Mhm.
Um, Now that my workers' comp case is settled, I can also say that there's probably other factors. I was a swimmer, and this condition that I had is called thoracic outlet syndrome, is common with people who swim, who do sports that have a lot of repetitive upper body motion. I also had done martial arts for many, many years when I was younger too. So just it's all a guess, but it was probably all a factor in how I ended up having this condition. And then the desk set it off. Also, just like my build, I'm a petite woman. It happens to petite women who are athletic,
Well,
and
it's really
it
alarming because
was
it was such a severe debilitation that it could happen
severe.
through these kind of mild and cumulative, you know, postural things.
Definitely. Yeah, it was really confusing and scary because I didn't understand how bad it was, and it kept getting worse. And the reason partly it got worse is because I got all the wrong advice from doctors and everyone else, to do yoga and do stretching and get massages, all the things you'd think to do when you're having muscle spasms and pain. But actually, every single thing that I had done, I think made it worse. I went to a
Mm.
chiropractor that I think made me much, much worse. And I remember coming home and just in tears. I've never been in such pain before. And so I wonder if I didn't try to do all the things to get better, if I had just gotten better, actually. But it got really, really bad, and I was really debilitated. I couldn't do basic things. I could barely feed myself. It was hard to sit up. It was hard to lift my hand, and um, I couldn't get dressed. I couldn't, do my hair or anything like that. And so, yeah, I couldn't function for a couple of years, and it was my life was sort of consumed with trying to figure out what was wrong and dealing with doctors who didn't listen to me or didn't believe me because it didn't show up on a test. They all told me it was in my head, that I just needed to be less anxious. I was told I was anxious and depressed. I was given antidepressants, even though I didn't have a history of depression or anxiety in my chart or at all ever before. I don't even think they really thought I had depression or anxiety. They just thought it might make me feel better, so they gave it to me. Yeah, I mean that's what the doctor said. This will calm you down because I was in
Mhm.
her office crying. So, if you have a really severe painful condition and the doctor says, I don't believe you and I don't know what's going on with you and you cry, then they throw pills at you.
Mhm.
So yeah, that woke me up to a lot of just how the mental health, or to not even the mental health, because I was a primary doctor, how the medical system works, right? And that gave me a healthy skepticism of the healthcare system right there. Even this is all pre-COVID,
Mhm.
so it really, yeah, it really opened up my eyes. And then, yeah, after all of that, I figured out what was wrong. I got a really special physical therapy. I ended up getting two really specialized surgeries. And I actually had two rounds of doctors not believing me because after the first surgery, they just thought I had what they called chronic regional pain syndrome, which means like your brain is misfiring pain signals after being in chronic pain. But no, actually, I had a mass in the place where they gave me the surgery that was compressing on my nerves for a second time. So, and all they had to do was do a scan, and actually that was visible. But they didn't believe me, so they didn't do it for a while. So I went through all this stress, and it was hard because people in my life didn't, understand, and I couldn't go out to dinner, I couldn't do things. So I wasn't in the world the way normally people were. It consumed me, and I certainly wasn't able to work. The most I could do function-wise was I was walking a few little dogs in my neighborhood that didn't pull on the leash, and I could go for walks, and that was the most functional thing I could do, and I was just grateful for it. But yeah, after all that time in my profession, that's what I was doing with my life. And then I finally got back to work after the lockdowns and after all of that. And yes, then I was the Rip Van therapist, Rip Van Winkle, who went back to this world that was completely mad to me. It didn't make any sense. And this was only, 3, 4 years, and not even that long, and things had completely shifted. Obviously, the COVID stuff, I knew that there was masking, of course, and I was in California and in a healthcare center. I knew that they were gonna mandate masks, but I just didn't think that my colleagues would be so gleeful to continue with this. And in fact, when I was in the office later and I would take my mask down to breathe, I would get reprimanded by my colleague and stuff like that. And I just couldn't believe that they didn't see the harms of it. Or if they did see it, they just thought it needed to be done regardless. There was no fight. There was no, okay, we're working with severely mentally ill patients. And we're making them wear masks where they can't see their faces. These are people with paranoia, people with severe anxiety, people with schizophrenia, people with recent suicide attempts. I mean, these are people who really need to see faces and it's important and need to breathe because a lot of coping is through breathing, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And people with like OCD, and then we're telling them we're literally having to wipe down the chair after they get up, and that at that point we already knew that it was aerosolized and that it wasn't on surfaces. That was already a fact, but we still were required to do it. And instead of my colleagues saying, hey guys, like let's get together and talk to the hospital and say that this is not okay for for our work. No, they were happy to do it and they actually believed it was necessary. And so I just felt like I was in a twilight zone. And then,
Mm-hmm.
of course, the gender thing was the biggest one that was in my face that I just couldn't believe it. And, I had been kind of moderately like just okay with, talking to trans people. I wasn't in this like space that I'm in now where I guess you'd call me transphobic or anti-trans or something like that. Um, I didn't really, I was sort of neutral about it. I didn't know a lot about it, to be honest. So but when I saw literally half the girls in this program identifying as trans and nobody pushing back on it, I just could not believe that. That was insane. And it was really obvious that they were using these trans identities to avoid their issues or to, find control when they felt powerless. To be able to tell the grown-ups that they're transphobes instead of actually dealing with their issues. I mean, we gave them this weapon that they could avoid everything and no one could tell them what to do. And these are teenagers that needed structure and they needed guidance. And then they were given this shield so that they didn't have to listen to somebody, a responsible person that cared and loved them to help them so they couldn't actually receive the help they needed as patients. So yeah, it all blew my mind. Like what we're dealing with acting out teens and we're telling them they could do whatever they want. Like what? I'm confused.
Yeah, it
And
was
yeah,
a
I
lot
was
of change. It
I
was,
was a liberal and I was, normal. Like I was,
yeah.
and then yeah, it opened my eyes up to a lot of things.
I want to hear more about the trans phenomenon and how you experienced that after coming back. You left at what, 2016, 2017, you came back in 2021
Yep.
ish.
Hmm.
And the COVID thing, when you're talking about masks, that I was so stunned by that also, by how you used the word gleefully, how quickly it was uptaken by so
Yeah.
many people and people who could have told you that it wasn't that healthy to be doing this. I mean, people who really should have known better were all in for masks. It was nuts. I actually, I don't know if I think I've talked about this before, but I got fired from my job in 2020 for not wearing a mask. But
Oh, I didn't know that.
it wasn't like I just patently refused. It was, I worked alone. I worked on the weekend. I was working for a naturopathic clinic. I had previously quit the job, but I'd been asked to come back to fill in for somebody who had quit without notice. So I was just there kind of really part-time. And so one day I was there and my boss came in and saw that I wasn't wearing a mask. Of course I wasn't wearing a mask. I was alone.
Yeah.
But I didn't wear a mask anyway. I didn't wear a mask to go to the grocery store. I had my own experiences. I have stories about what that was like.
I
But,
did that. I went through that.
but I
And
offered to put it on for her because she was so uncomfortable with me not having one on. I said, if you'd like me to put one on, you can, if you want to back away, I'll approach the box of masks and put them on. And I got a letter from her, an email from her a couple of weeks later telling me that she knew I needed to stop by the office. She said, I demand that you comply with the mask mandate. And I said, I won't comply with the mask mandate, but I'm happy to put one on if it makes you comfortable. And I got a response back, your services are no longer required.
wow.
I was fired not for refusing to wear a mask, but for having the wrong opinion about masks, for not
Right.
being gleeful like she was about the mask. And I saw that so much. It wasn't enough that you would just do the thing to make someone comfortable. It was, you don't think right about this. We're all supposed to have the same mental,
Hmm.
state around masks. We're supposed to have the same orientation toward this COVID craziness.
Yeah, it's wild.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to have all these clients that you said you could see that this was hurting their care, the quality of their communication, and people were completely blind to this and not even like thinking that it was unfortunate that they had to do this, but
Right.
happily
Like at least
voicing it.
being like, well, we know we have to do this, but this is really hard and this is, there is this big cost here. They didn't even didn't even notice that. They just yeah. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because I was working I was a per diem because I still couldn't work a normal full-time job because I still have chronic pain. That's also why I can be so outspoken and have less to lose here. That's also part of my story. Um, but I was working with adults and I was working with the teens. And I remember the day, this was in 2021, when we were in California going through like a recall campaign to recall our governor, Gavin Newsom. So for Gavin Newsom to try to, I think, get some points with the Californians, he lifted the state mask mandate. So in general, the state finally is suddenly, all of a sudden, all these numbers that they're crunching, like this is when we're going to lift masks. Well, no, all of a sudden it's because of the recall. We didn't have to wear masks in the state, but in the healthcare centers, they didn't because for some reason it's more necessary in a healthcare center, even though we know they don't work in any setting. Um, but what I did was in my groups with the kids, I just offered to them, hey, you can pull down your mask so we can see what each other looks like. And the reaction it was really sad because
Mm.
they were so anxious to show what they look like to their peers. And they quickly just put it back on. And they were saying like, I feel naked, I feel exposed because they had had their faces covered for 2 years already. And they didn't, this is through like important developmental years, teenagers, we're adults at least. Like we didn't grow up wearing masks. I mean, you think about 2 years of your life when you're 15 years old is a long chunk of time. And yeah, there was one boy that he was like cool with it, and everybody else was like, and they put it back on and they're freaking out. And that was just so sad.
Oh gosh, I think it's going to be a long time before we really realize what this did to kids.
Yeah.
What you're saying about how anxious they were about uncovering their faces, right after in Washington state, the mask mandate was partially lifted for people it was lifted for people who'd had the COVID shot. This is
Right. I remember
the whole
that.
COVID theater with like, okay, if you've had the shot, you can take it off. And it wasn't available for kids. It was just for adults. So you started to see a lot of adults walking around without masks suddenly. And you didn't know anymore if these are people who didn't think the masks were worth it or if these were people who had gotten so it was just this really confusing time. But
Hmm.
I was out somewhere with my family, and there was a man and a teenage girl walking, and he had no mask on and she had a mask on. And I had angry thoughts for this family in my head. I did. I thought, what a creep. Look at him making his daughter wear that thing, and he's walking around without it because he got his shot. I'm having these kind of assumptions. And we actually were walking kind of parallel to them. So we walked beside them, and I could actually hear part of their conversation. And it was him begging her to take it off, and her
Yeah.
saying, no,
Oh,
I'm not going to
wow.
take it off. Yeah.
I was gonna say the teenagers, they think about that when you're a teenager, like remember going to high school and you're like a zit and you're like you could give you anything to have to be able to cover that up,
Yep.
and
Yep.
they get to do that all the time. And they also they get to cover up maybe what they are self-conscious about their own looks, but also they can make faces, they can yawn, they could, it's kind of in a way lazy because you can hide yourself. I mean, we talk about all the time in mental health how people wear masks to cover up their feelings. Well, we're literally making them wear masks to cover up their feelings in therapy. That is just a wild concept.
It also
Yeah.
seems just like a continuation of their online presence, like insofar if they're using filters and like other things where people aren't exactly seeing what they look like when they're
Yeah.
hiding behind their phone, right? Like they get to carry that back out in the world, that they have a way to do that there too.
Yeah. And it was a weird experience to see their faces after working with them for a period of time. And then, I mean, it was a weird thing like, oh, that's what you look like. I didn't even, you kind of imagine. I don't know if you have that experience when you're working with people in masks. And they said that about me. They said, I didn't realize that's what you look like. And then I'm like, am I ugly? I know I'm Jewish. I have a nose. Like, but it's even I was self-conscious, and a teenager, of course, is going to be self-conscious.
Yeah, it is so true. It's so true. And I feel like we could spend the whole hour just talking about this because there's so much to say, and maybe we should at some point. But
Yeah.
I'm really interested in when you said that you came back to work, or you came back to professional life, and you found that almost half of the kids had some kind of transgender identity, and that the adults were tiptoeing around this and sort of letting this be dictated by the kids.
Not
That
letting,
must
they
have
were
been
like
really strange.
celebrating it.
Oh,
Encouraging
wow.
it. And
So
Yeah.
what was it like before? Oh, sorry,
It was,
Deborah, go ahead.
sorry. Well,
go
yeah,
ahead.
it's just so surprising to me that people, anything in the world, if there was like almost nothing of something and then there was a lot of something, you think like a couple people go, this is interesting, or
Yeah.
this is different. And it just sounds like none of that occurred. Like just nothing, like even if they were into it, to go, gee, I wonder why,
Yeah, right.
anyway, go ahead. I sorry to interrupt. It's
I
just,
know. Well, those were the thoughts. Like it was like, well, how can this be? Like I'd worked at teens and high schools for 20 years, and severe populations. I worked in group homes. I worked with foster kids. I worked with all those kids, and there was never a trans kid that whole time. The first trans kid I met, actually, there was one kid in the whole school. I was a clinical director at a high school in Palo Alto, and there was one girl who identified as trans in the whole school. And the school, we did go along with her identity, but we also acknowledged that she was a girl. Like nobody pretended she was something other than a girl. We knew that, nobody was acting like that. And also, I remember the school trying to figure out the dilemmas around it because they needed to find like a changing space for her for gym, and they needed to figure out where she should use the bathroom. They knew it was a dilemma. They weren't like just, gender is fluid and you can go and do wherever you want. And they really recognized that she was a girl who wanted to be a boy or called herself a boy, but they knew she was a girl and they weren't trying to pretend otherwise. So that was in 2015. And then yeah, the job at UCSF actually was with adults. And of course, you don't see this with adults. And even in the 2021, that was the other big contrast. So I was working in two adult track programs. One was a substance abuse program, and one was just regular mental health. Zero trans people. And then the teens, it was half the girls, about a third of the kids total, I'd say was the ratio. And yeah, no one questioned it. And I remember when I was starting out, getting the training, you sort of shadow someone to get, to watch how the other therapists work. And this one therapist who I was shadowing, she was good too, by the way. But I remember her telling me, when we go to the teen unit, we start out our group saying our pronouns, and then we say what age they are, and then we say an icebreaker. And and then we went together to the adult unit and we didn't do pronouns. And so I asked her, I'm like, why do
Hmm.
you do pronouns with the kids and not with the adults? And then she kind of just looked at me blankly and was just like, I don't know. I never thought about it.
Are you kidding me? Oh my
Wow.
gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. When we go to the teen unit, we do our pronoun. We say our pronouns. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Wow. This is crazy. This is like when I first encountered this pronoun thing, it was in a group interview at my graduate program to become a counselor. And they went around and asked everybody to say your name and pronouns. And I thought, this is weird. I am so uncomfortable with this. This is incredibly unhealthy. How is this a mental health program?
Yeah.
And now you're describing a mental health facility where they go specifically and reinforce this pronoun crap with the kids.
That's what they do. Yeah.
Oh my
And they were
gosh.
proud of it. And it was really it was a lot of it was led by the kids. The kids wanted to do it. It was like a little game for them. They were trained already to do it. They were conditioned to do it. So when I was leading the groups, without someone with me, the kids sometimes they would do it on their own. I did not prompt them to do it, but I of course couldn't push back and be like, no, don't do the pronouns. And you can't do that because that just that wouldn't go well with these kids. But they were certainly conditioned to do it and they enjoyed it. It was a game. It was a way to feel like they fit in when they didn't feel like they fit in. Both the kids that were trans, but then the ones who weren't trans, you think about them, they got points because they got to say to the trans kid, oh, I'm your ally. I accept you. I'm, this great person. And that's how they learned how to relate to each other as opposed to, actually being honest and genuine and connecting as human beings. It became about this superficial pronoun thing. And I noticed
Oh.
that about kids in general.
I have a quick question about that. 'Cause now it's just make me wonder. I mean, we kind of know people are using this lens, oppressor, oppressed, like more theoretically. But does your sense as kids relate to each other, like these days or in these programs, that foreground is identity as an ally or as an oppressed person, and like even making friends, people are
Totally.
making these calculations. I mean, I kind of know people are thinking that way, but when you just described it like that, I don't
That's
know. It
exactly
just had
what's happening.
it had way more weight. And so we're not even dealing with people. We're like, oh, look at me. I have a friend who's marginalized or
It gives them
or
like
yeah.
this status or something. Yeah, like that and we're talking about kids that already struggle socially, they already have mental health issues. And so that's how they're trained. I'm calling them trained to relate to one another, and I feel like it's really unhealthy.
It reminds me of how when we were kids, we'd say, what kind of music do you listen to? And you'd know who was your group based on
Yeah, it's a
musical
little like that.
preferences.
But at
Yeah.
least that's something you actually have interest in, and it
Yeah.
shows something about your personality. It's not
Yeah.
something you've been sort of like
It's not
condi-
about your sexuality.
right.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so that was and this was 2021, so this was the year after the big George Floyd riots and BLM was really big at the time. I think more than it is now. So that was the undertones of that were still very much present. And so and we're talking the Bay Area of California, San Mateo County. San Mateo is actually the name of the town, and mostly white kids, a few Asian kids. I think there might have been one or two black kids, but not many. And so they're all taught that they were oppressors in one way or another. So they're either identifying as trans to opt out of being an oppressor or identifying as some kind of ally to, virtue signal that they're not that kind of oppressor. Yeah, great for their mental health, don't you think?
Mm.
No, that was sarcasm.
No, it's totally nuts. It's really interesting. So as you started to see this issue at work, at what point did you come to the understanding that you have of it now? How did you learn to articulate what you were experiencing?
Like on the trans issue or in
Yeah.
general?
Yeah, in general and on the trans issue.
Yeah, it took a little time, honestly, on the trans issue. How did I really? I think I started making. Okay, so when I was basically fired for not taking the thing because we're on YouTube, right? Um, because I had gone through all of that chronic pain and finally got back to work. I just didn't feel comfortable. And I was a healthcare worker in California. I was only per diem, still getting disability money actually. So I didn't need the job. And so when that all happened, I was devastated. It was awful because that job meant a lot just to be in society after all that time of being out. But so basically because I had lost so much from being disabled and then being displaced like once again, I started making Instagram reels about my experience. Like generally speaking, I didn't talk about anybody's kids personally, but just like imagine being a kid, who's lost and alone, and now you get to call everybody a transphobe in your life. And then I got all kinds of engagement from this. So I was just speaking common sense, like just a common sense social worker therapist who'd worked with kids for many, many years, just looking at this like, what the heck? I still honestly wasn't that I did not understand or know how bad or how harmful the hormones are. I didn't know. I didn't know, I didn't know anything about the surgeries. I didn't know any of the euphemisms and, the jargon that's used now, like top surgery, bottom surgery. I wasn't kind of in on any of that language. Um, I still probably you could say believed in some kind of true trans, and I don't anymore. What I believe in is that there are people who really feel uncomfortable in their body, but I don't think anyone is born in the wrong body. So that took me about a year to come to. Like that didn't come overnight. Um, so, and I just didn't realize, yeah, just how harmful it was. And as someone who just came from all this disability and chronic pain, to know that these hormones and surgeries are creating giving a young, healthy people chronic pain and disability, that really hit home for me. Like I think that really touched a nerve for me. Like, I can't stand silent on this. Right. And then yeah, and then seeing how all my colleagues and the profession had just completely embraced it. Like they just all gone mad. It was just strange.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. It took so, but it was an evolution, and I started to listen to detransitioners. I started to meet some people. I kind of educated myself, you could say, on the topic. I started to meet parents who have basically lost their kids to their trans identity. I remember going when Jennifer Lawle had her um the premiere of her first, well, it's not her first film, but the Detransition Diaries. um I went to that premiere because it was in my area, and I remember sitting next to a mom who was telling me about her daughter who is like in her freshman year of college who's still identifying as trans, and just how painful that was for the mom. So then I also just saw the bigger picture of how this is dividing families and the agenda behind it. And I didn't see all that before. Like then I was like, oh, this is dark. Like I got into how this is this form of transhumanism. Never thought about that before. I was in a documentary, it's called Disconnected, and there I was still in my, I'd say, earlier phases of waking up. And that film actually helped me understand some of the connections. Like the other people that he featured in that film talked a lot about porn and how that impacts kids and being overexposed and, to this hypersexual culture. It made a really interesting parallel to birth control and how that is creating a dissociation from our body and our reproductive health.
Mhm.
A lot of things honestly I hadn't thought about. So I think it was just like being in the space, meeting other people, hearing other smart people talk about it, meeting people who had personal experiences, and then connecting that to my past and current clinical experience.
Yeah, I
Wow.
want to
Yeah. Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Deborah. Yeah.
Well, one thing that struck me, and I skimmed your book, and then just hearing you talk now, and it seems like that probably made such a great foundation. It seems like you have understood teenagers and that's adolescent development, and that's always stuck with you. And it seems like people have just completely forgotten that at all.
That's it.
And like you're like even saying like, oh, they're trying to get power or whatever, and it's like everyone else just kind of forgot developmental stages and what teenagers are negotiating, and you just never lost that, and that's informed you quite a bit as you look at all of this.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I see it as common sense. I think because I wonder what would have happened if I wasn't ever on disability, if I would have been slightly brainwashed the way others were, because it would have been like a slower boil, right? Like, but because it was such a contrast from, the year 2016, 17 to the year 2021, because those were the years that I think this really took hold and people were doing it. So when came in that way, but yeah, I think even my colleagues who I work with, they understood adolescence, but for some reason, when it came to this topic, it just went out the window, which is really weird.
Yeah, it's like this is so superficial, we can ignore it and just leave it, or we can placate this and not be that worried about it, or we take this
No, they believed
seriously.
in it.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
actually believed in it.
Yeah.
When we were in the staff meetings, when the kids weren't even there, they were more worried about the pronouns. Do you know what we would when we have a new kid, because it was, short term, like IOP, individualized outpatient program. And so they kids would rotate, 3 to 6 weeks at a time. They'd come in. And so there'd always be like a new intake. And so as part of the new intake, and the first thing they would do is, what is the pronoun and the preferred name of this child? We didn't even hear anything else. We got to the other stuff, but they were so worried about the pronoun. It was on the board, like the pronoun thing, and everybody made sure they had the right pronoun. And the clinical stuff, we got there, but that wasn't first, which
Mm.
to me, I was like, what is going on? Like they were so worried. Like I think part of it is they were worried about each other. Like it felt like this fear.
Mhm.
But there were enough people that believed in it that I think the people who were fearful were silent. And myself included, because I was new and I'd been on disability and I didn't say anything yet. I was just about to, but then, they took me out, which I don't think was a coincidence.
Yeah, I know it's hard to grapple with what to make of this stuff if you know that it's uncomfortable for you. It's hard or it was hard, at least at that time, to have the confidence to speak up because you're kind of on your back foot. You don't even understand really what the heck is happening.
Yeah. I mean, if it were me now, if I
Hmm.
were in that setting, I certainly would be speaking up. But I really didn't have the knowledge. I just knew it was wrong and weird
Hmm.
and nothing I'd ever seen before.
Hmm.
And I remember trying to talk about it with people, but they were afraid to. And I was honestly more at that time more worried about the masks and the the racial oppressor or oppressive thing that was pretty prominent. The pronoun thing wasn't the first thing that I was really more worried about the masks. Like I really wanted that to go away, or at least for people to acknowledge that it was harmful.
You
So
know,
I did
one
say that. I spoke about that.
I appreciate about your perspective that you also come in as a bit of a medical skeptic, it seems like. I don't know how you would identify yourself in that regard, but the things you've said, it's like you talk about your own experience with chronic pain and medical issues, and you think, why would you unnecessarily expose yourself to that potential as a young, healthy person with a healthy body? Why would you start down that path?
Yeah, and of course you don't expect the kids to know that because they're kids and they want that immediate gratification and they're told that this is cool and fun. But you'd think the adults would have a little discretion and look into what is putting cross-sex hormones into a young body due to a child in particular, just sterilizing them. But then there's so many other ill effects that happen. You'd think adults would do a double take, but they don't. They don't even think about it. And yet
There's
oh, go ahead.
another parallel. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
Another parallel. You mentioned that in that documentary that you were in, they talked about certain other aspects like porn and the birth control pill. And one of the things I had this realization recently that the birth control might represent the first time people took a maintenance medication just for life, like
Yeah.
the first lifestyle medicine. And
Yeah, I don't
so in
know
a
if it is,
way,
but yeah.
I don't know if it is either, but that it seems to me, I can't think of another thing that predates that. I don't know if there were maybe allergy medications or something that was going on before that, but it seems like the birth control pill is marketed to absolutely healthy people with no
Yeah.
physical problem, but we're going to do something to alter your body in a way that benefits your lifestyle. And so it seems like that's kind of the beginning of this, that it's the predecessor to the gender
Yeah, I
body
think there's a
modification.
connection. I think there is. I mean, they're hormones too.
Consumer, yeah, kind of consumer medicine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Lifestyle
it's
drugs.
like a tiny step towards that transhumanism because it's stopping you from recognizing that your body reproduces because you could it stops the functioning of your body to get pregnant.
Mhm.
And yeah, I never thought about it like that. I kind of wish I had been more awake to it. I didn't question it when I was younger. I did take
Mhm.
it when I was in my 20s.
Yeah, same. Yeah. Well, so at some point you started writing about this, and who was your audience when you started writing? And did you have a book in mind?
Yeah, when I first started writing, so I do have this whole website called The Parent's Guide to Mental Health, and that's just a broader thing. It's basically it was here I am, like a normal therapist that like didn't get indoctrinated by all this ideology, and I know there are families that are looking for mental health services, and I can't give them all names everywhere in the country or even in the world, but I can tell them just what's appropriate mental health care so that they could advocate for their families and they could advocate, know what's right and wrong, or just ask questions. So as part of that Parents Guide to Mental Health, I did a little gender dysphoria one, which was about like 15 pages typed, and I did some videos. So that's how it started. So it was geared towards parents, just to basically have an overview what this is about. There are some harms. Um, it didn't get into like a whole bunch of advice. It really was more about just the overview and then some questions to be able to screen for like a gender critical therapist and and a bunch of resources. At the time all the websites that were around like GenSpect, and at the time it was Geta, and um like Fourth Wave Now, and just all the different websites that I found that just had that alternative point of view on gender that wasn't about simply affirming. So I put all that together. So that was the beginnings of this book. And then I was like, I'll just print that up as a booklet so that when I go to events, I have it in print and I can give it to parents, because I've noticed this, a lot of people just don't really want to go online, especially if there's any kind of paywall, because there was a paywall. So I wanted to print it. So I had it available, especially when I went to like mom conferences and things like that. And then it got bigger and bigger and it turned into a book. So that's how it landed. But yeah, the audience was for parents and families, but I think that other people can really benefit from it. I think other mental health professionals could really benefit from it to understand what's going on, because there's that whole chapter like why are kids doing this? And that really just goes into a lot of the clinical ideas and just the basic like influences that are in the media and politics and all of that, that it seems so obvious to me, but I'm realizing that as someone who's not thinking about it every day, it's not so obvious to them
Mhm.
that like, oh yeah, the pride flag was on the White House last June. So yeah, that might have an influence on some people, right? And I actually have some images in the book that include that. And so I think it can help therapists. There's a whole section on like how to approach a trans teen or a trans identified teen, however you want to say it, which has the tone of not confronting them and not telling them, to snap out of it that they're only two sexes, but also to not just simply affirm them either, like more
Mhm.
exploratory, um, you know, more kind of approaching it sideways, like one example is asking them like, what does trans mean to you? To ask them
Mhm.
that question. And that's probably going to be a really hard question and could be received with a lot of anger and pushback, because just by asking that, you're poking a big hole in probably the way they see things and they don't want to think about it. So, a lot of it's just understanding that you're dealing with a kid that's, seen a lot of platitudes and slogans and really maybe hasn't thought about it, what it means to them, even though it might feel really personal for them.
Mhm.
So yeah, those are some of the things that are in there. So that can help a clinician working with a family that's dealing with this issue, and then also parents.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I really liked how actionable your book is. I mean, there's, the different chapters, there's usually like a good list. I actually took notes and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like so many things this person can do. And it's particularly on the part you just mentioned, which is how to engage in conversation with your teen and all those open-ended questions, like sort of like, well, what is it? What do you think it means to be a boy or a girl? Or what, you know, all of that, because I could see a parent just grappling for how to not be confrontational and yet
Right.
engage. And you just give them like a massive list of possibilities for getting into conversation.
Yeah, and they're all ideas, and I frame it as like I can't give you a script. Uh, I don't know you, I don't know your child, and a lot of it is dependent upon your relationship and how close you are and what that kid is like. Some of it I frame as you might not even want to talk. You might want to just sit and ask them what music they like and listen to their music, or do something to share their interest with them, and work from there. Uh, but yeah, it just gives a lot of ideas so that the person, like my goal is to empower people so they can think about it and then actually think for themselves about what's the best course of action.
This is a fantastic resource, and it's not very long. It would be easy
Yeah.
for someone to read this and then remember where they saw what, flag it, and refer back to it. It is really kind of a guide.
Yeah, it is kind of a guide, and I tried to keep it really like the language really simple. It's not heavy in clinical language. It's really straightforward. I don't go into like psychological theory or developmental theory. I just don't think that's necessary. Like a parent in crisis doesn't want to know about, psychodynamic theory and why they should ask this or that. Like I just, speak from common sense. I have a list of like some ideas of what your kid can say when they're confronted with pronouns. This is even before they're indoctrinated. Like, a simple no could suffice, or why are you making me say this? Or why are you making us fight? Like, stuff like that. Just like all these little like ideas in the voice of a child. And then of course for you to think about what would your prompt your kid what they would say in their words.
Mhm, mhm.
And you have a
That's
nice little glossary too. And there was
Oh
a word
yeah.
I didn't know. I knew all the words except the one, what is it now that the C is in front of the AFAB or
Oh
the
yeah.
AMAB?
Coerced,
Yeah, like so it's
coercedly assigned at
KMAB and
birth.
KFAB.
That just
Something.
came out. So if you're assigned male or female at birth according to a trans person, but now I was looking at I think it was the GLAD website because I was looking these things up on these websites, and they added a C, which means you've been coerced. So and then I even say in the glossary, like I point out there's a really impressive way for them to feel even more like a victim because just by being a boy or a girl, they are a victim of society because they've been coerced to be that boy or a girl, and that is their worldview.
wow.
It was crazy.
Wow. That's just it's come so far. I mean, what in the world? I don't even know what to say to that.
I think
That's
it actually came from intersex because in the past, I'm not sure what's I'm not honestly not totally up on the true intersex procedures, but I know that they usually would take an intersex person and try to make them be female and alter the genitals or call them female. And sometimes when that person grew up, they felt coerced to be that female when
Mm,
they were maybe not that female. So I think it actually came from that. So
I get that.
that's what they do. They kind of co-opt another thing and then they make it their own.
yeah, I heard somebody saying that no kid should be forced to go through puberty.
Oh yeah, I know.
Who was it that said that recently? Somebody
I see it all the time now, but I
in,
remember seeing that in the wild like last year for the first time that like
in the
forced
wild.
puberty.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Well,
yeah,
that's the
forced to the
normalization
wrong
of,
puberty.
yeah, forcing the, it's the normalization of medical lifestyles. It's you're supposed to we're going to stick medicine in between you and your natural development and call that normal.
Yeah,
And resistance
exactly.
to becoming an adult. I mean, it seems like there's just this society-wide resistance to becoming adult and mature, like
Mm-hmm.
physically and psychologically.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
Wow.
then the
Wow.
other piece I have in there is I attended a therapy conference and a therapy class. And I write in detail exactly what they're teaching parents on how to manipulate the parents to affirm their child's trans identity, even when the parent doesn't want to. Because they come off really nice when they do it, but they're manipulating you. And so now you know the inside reasons why if you read my book. Just basically, I mean, I could say the one of the big things that I just was shocked about was they use the Kubler-Ross stages of grief for a parent towards their child. So you're if you're a parent with a trans child, you need according to the therapist in their training, you need to grieve your cis child and this therapist is
This
going to be
is
really kind.
horrible. This
Yeah,
is
like
horrible. What gaslighting?
so, right? Exactly.
What
So you
terror? Yeah.
like they're like, well, we're going to meet the parent where they're at and like help them grieve and and so they do in this really kind approach. So you can see how parents can easily get manipulated by a therapist who believes in it and is acting really kind and providing support, grief support for something that's just because they know that their kid was on YouTube for too long. I
I'm
mean, gosh,
I'm
So
envisioning
bad.
the like a political cartoon where the psychological profession is a scuba diver or is like a diver, and the gender ideology is an anvil, and the diver's just holding this anvil and sinking. Like, this is the psychological
Yes.
profession undermining its own credibility faster than,
Oh,
it's amazing.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then this isn't in my book, but I just want to share this because I just went to on a Zoom call and a recent training. I was tweeting about this. The other thing they talked about in this one training, I wish I had it in my book, but it's not there, is apparently people of color or like black, or they call it, BIPOC, they're problematic. And because
they
the
said
trans
this?
they said it. They said that I mean, they didn't use that word, but they said that it's more difficult to work with them because they view trans as a white issue. And so because they're not stupid.
Yeah. Well, it does seem
Because
like it's kind of a white middle class issue,
right. And
which is
so
the same group that's so targeted by CRT. And so that's like a get out of jail free pass for people who don't want to be oppressors. But that theory has
exactly.
been put
But
out there.
there's some young black kids that are taking to this, and usually probably because they're getting bullied or they're autistic or they have some vulnerability, so they're taking to it, and their parents are like, we don't play that, right? But but the therapist that they send them to starts to kind of, I would say, bully the parents to say, you need to accept your trans child. And they're in the training, they basically were explaining how the black families are more difficult to convince because they see that as a white issue. I personally view it as, yeah, exactly what you were saying, but also just they're they understand reality. I think they're just less easily manipulated on this subject.
Mhm.
And so they had to have a whole section in this training on how to approach the BIPOC families to help the parents understand. And they kept using the term meet them where they're at, and we need to involve the families because we believe in family therapy and family support, instead of actually listening to the parent and their concerns.
Yeah.
It's
Wow, it's just this assumption we know, and they're not quite there yet, but
exactly. They even flipped the whole motivational interviewing. You guys are
Oh
familiar with
gosh.
that.
Yeah.
So for your audience that isn't familiar with that, motivational interviewing is what you use for like a drug addict or somebody who's doing some really dangerous behavior, like perhaps, eating disorder or something like that, and use motivational interviewing, which is like a gentle way of helping somebody recognize that they're doing some behavior that's really dangerous. So the instructor started to say, well, I use like a motivational interviewing approach to help me. I meet them where what stage they're at, and then I help them understand what's necessary for their child.
oof.
Yeah, motivational interviewing has always struck me as both brilliant because it can really help people to enhance their own motivation to do something that they already want to do, and dangerous because it's so
It's
easily
manipulative.
used, yeah, for manipulation. Like, it's such a sales tactic.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we have a few minutes to read a couple of viewer comments. And first, I wanted to go into the chat. JMR Davies says, I think the idea of solid ground is brilliant. I'm in the UK and think that a lot of individuals would benefit from a service such as this. And we have people from the UK in Solid Ground. So please, if you're interested, you can check us out. What's the website again?
SolidGroundSupport.com.
.com. I always forget if it's com or org. It's com. SolidGroundSupport.com. So please check us out if you're interested. And let's see, Ninja Kitty, thank you so much for being in the chat and for posting those links. It's really, really helpful. Let's see, oh, Helena Blavatsky, I'm sorry, Helena
Blavatsky.
Blavatsky. Okay, thank you, Deborah. She says Gavin Newsom is a Batman villain.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a
I
smoother.
see it.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
100%.
Yeah.
American Psycho. Okay.
Yeah, and I've seen those memes actually. That's actually a meme.
Somebody, I just lost it, but somebody said, oh no, it's S Koval 7 says it's just insane that to me that people can't say certain words on YouTube. Yes, it is. Benjamin had a conversation about a certain medical intervention a little while back and got stricken from his channel for a period of time, wasn't allowed to
Gosh.
post. And so that's pretty crazy. Yeah. And Ninja Kitty says, do not use sis in chat. This is a slur and I will not allow it.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, I'm using it in a certain context, but yes, I agree
Yeah,
that it's
I
not
don't
a
think he
word
was
we should
talking to you.
use. Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree.
And that's in the
So,
dictionary because people who aren't kind of awake to all this, you start using these words and the parents like, what are you even talking about? So I have this, I call it the Trans English Dictionary, so
oh
that a
wow.
parent can understand what the heck their kid is talking about, or maybe what the therapist is talking about, so it doesn't go over their head, because it can get really intimidating when they're using all of these words that, and they use it in this way, I think on purpose to intimidate someone, to be like, well, you're not in the know, right? So it's part of it's to help them understand what's really going on.
Yeah, there's so much language manipulation, even when you just talk about assigned female at birth. And now they want to
Yes,
call people
crazy.
uh a person with a vagina. It's like we already have a word for that. It's
Yeah.
female, it's woman, it's girl, it's, we already have words for that. And so they haven't changed anything fundamental, but they're trying to change the way we talk about things.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very Orwellian.
Yeah, and you never hear a person with a penis
Yeah, it's
or
true.
scrotum haver. You never hear
Right.
this. It's always so there's that conversation too, but it is
Hmm.
just a bunch of linguistic manipulation. So I'm glad you have that there because it's helpful. It's changing so fast. So we had a comment from this is our conversation with Carrie Smith on polyamory. So Elaine 2732 said, my daughter, 15 years old, today just talked about how she was disturbed by her friends being in a poly relationship. All are female, though some claim he, his pronouns. It really seems to be a thing right now. Talking about the prevalence of polyamory in the culture. And we had a longer comment on this also, and I don't have the person's name. This was an email that I received after the polyamory conversation. This person says, I'm listening to your podcast about polyamory. You and your guests are missing something very important. The queer community is already saturated with poly relationships. It has been for 10 years or so. Women don't come out and leave their husbands anymore. They open up their marriages. There are very few single lesbians available to date who aren't interested in and don't practice polyamory. Most of the middle-aged women I would previously have been able to date are choosing to stay in marriages that are no longer sexual and date in a poly configuration. Combined with the very intense progressivism where I live, also worse in the queer community, it has been so frustrating that I have given up trying to find a partner. It's not just the straight women punished for the popularization of this lifestyle. It's also popularization, sorry. It's not just the straight men preying on the limited options of others. Married people of all kinds are now taking advantage of the scarcity of single monogamous partners. Those of us without a partner are the side partner in these configurations, left with the emotional dregs.
Oh, that sounds awful. I
It
mean,
does. Yeah.
I'm hearing queer theory all over that, is what I hear. I mean,
Mhm.
there's been a concerted effort to destroy the family and destroy what's normal and make it normal. And that's what I'm hearing. And it's a shame that that writer can't find someone that, can connect with them in the way that would be uh, loving and real for them. I mean, hopefully maybe they can look outside of these communities. I mean, it's not like everyone's doing that, but it sounds like where they live, that's more common. But I know it's happening more, and I think that's part of what's going on. Is like, I mean, get really dark, but I feel like this is destroying society and destroying the families.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that I've had that same thought, and I can also relate a little bit to this person because I spent a very short amount of time looking at online dating sites after my divorce, and there was so much ENM in the bios, which means
What does
ethical
that mean?
non-monogamy. It
Oh,
basically means I'm already with somebody and you're just my side piece, but my main piece already knows. And so it's
wow.
cool. It's cool. I'm cheating with you. I'm not going to get into you, but I'd like to go, fool around. It's basically hookups with
Yeah.
already partnered people.
Huh. This is
So
honestly a little over my scope because I've been focusing more on the kids,
yeah.
but I mean, but it's connected because this is what queer theory is to normalize what's not normal. And um, yeah, what used to be sort of a fringe thing is becoming more and more common.
And also just to follow whatever your whim is, right? Like I
Yeah.
just sort of feel like this now, and I need to be liberated to do whatever I feel like. Yeah.
Right. And in the end, it's sort of an empty existence. I mean, I used to kind of glamorize like the 60s and, like the hippie kind of lifestyle and the communes, until I learned more about how really women were used as commerce, sexually, and, there was a lot of rape, and like it's not as fun and free loving as I was sold it to be. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, and there is this culture of like immediate gratification, and then we're not actually learning how to connect and learning how to be fulfilled.
Mm.
When you were talking, I think that both of you mentioned something about immaturity and a unwillingness to grow up in relation to some of the gender ideology. This is what made me think of the polyamory issue. And you find people in these immature states of relationship that are unwilling to progress through and move into the more mature phase of relationship. You're going to continue to bring your relationship back to that immature seeking and really passionate early phase.
Yeah. And I was just thinking I could therapize it a little, and I'm just thinking about, this could be a lot of people who have attachment issues or some kind of trauma or something. And, there's a lot of fear of making that commitment and making that real connection, to lose that, right? So this is a surefire way to avoid those feelings of loss. So there's that piece too.
Well, thanks for being a good sport and going into some viewer comments with us. I have a bunch more. I really want to make time to read them. Maybe we'll have to devote a longer episode to just viewer feedback.
Sure.
But I know I kind of threw those in at you at the last minute. So thanks for getting into that.
You're welcome.
And thank you for coming on to talk about your book. It is, I want to get a hard copy of it myself. That's a beautiful cover. Did you design it?
So I worked with the designer and picked out these images. So that there's like this, it's a trans flag image with this sort of warped, weird family on top, because I had the idea of it being like how trans is warping the family. And then she made the colors more brighter, and I liked how she did the color palette. And then this is the back with the words on it, and that's my bio. So I like how she did the colors. So she laid it out, but I gave her the concept, and I went on to, stock photos and picked out the images to put it together.
Well, I think it's fantastic, and I hope a lot of people will go out and get this because your perspective is really valuable, and I think you see things in a really thorough and interconnected way, and also very practical. So thank you so much, Pamela.
You're welcome. And I just want to tell you something funny. So
Yeah.
I have this Instagram page called The Truthful Therapist that I came out, as I said, when I was first coming off my disability and all. When your videos are going viral, tons of people were sending me your thing. They're like, you guys are so much alike. You guys are saying so much of the same stuff. So it's just cool that we're actually now talking.
Oh yeah. I was really glad to meet you when we met in person. Was it October or November? So, and I'm glad we've been connected. So I'm really looking forward to more of these conversations.
And Deborah, it's been great having you too.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to get to interact with you. I've seen you in interviews, so I feel like I know you, but now I get to really talk with you.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us in the chat, and I hope you all have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next Monday.